from the vault of Ancient Rome Live. It's a live lecture on the world famous Alexander Mosaic. Let's dive into this fascinating history. All right, so we're talking about Alexander the Great, the mosaic. We're going to talk about the basic parameters of its history and the painting it's supposedly based upon. Here's a nice panning shot of some of the tales. It's currently housed in the Archaeological Museum of Naples. Actually, today it's off view as the restoration, big conservation project is taking place. It hasn't really been subjected to any real intense scrutiny in terms of its preservation, but you can see it's on a wall in the museum. And of course, the backing onto which the mosaic has been placed includes metal, and that metal over time has rusted. This is a phenomenon that affects ancient works of art all throughout the world. And so it's been removed and it's being put on modern backing, which then allows them to do further conservation work. But here it is, a quick view before the restoration work took place. We're going to talk about what scene is represented and then its context in the Roman or Pompeian house of the Faun, and we'll take a look at a lot of the details. Okay, so here it is before the conservation work. We're going to get closer and closer. This is over 5 meters by 3 meters, so it is a giant. It's one of the greatest and most famous mosaics preserved from antiquity. It's composed of millions and millions and millions of tesserae laid by hand. And there are so many details. I'm just going to show you these couple of videos. There's Darius III the Great against the protagonist here, Alexander the Great, with his helmet off. Quite possibly the truest portrait we have of this ruler, because we think this is based upon a contemporarily produced painting. So this is the permanent stone version of that painting. Look at all those details. His breastplate with the little gorgon head. There's Bucephalus, his famous steed. And there are so many military features, the spears, the helmets, the shields that allow us to identify this as accurate Macedonian and Persian armor of the time of the 4th century BC. So Alexander the Great, a larger than life figure, I suppose. You got two versions that you can look at in the movies. You can look at the Oliver Stone version. You can look at the earlier Richard Burton version. But essentially look at what this young man did. It's all predicated on the fact that his father, Philip of Macedon, already defeated the Greeks. When he was assassinated, Alexander the Great, by the way, was implicated in that assassination. On the eve of invading the Persian Empire, Alexander steps in and quickly, surprisingly, against all odds, defeats the Persian Empire. And there you can see where he goes, through Turkey, down through the Middle East, into Egypt, back over into Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the way to the into India. So quite a magnificent enterprise, famously then collapsing and breaking into smaller kingdoms ruled by his generals, his successors. And then, eventually in will come the Romans, but the Romans never pushed this far east. It's one of those markers of greatness that they, attempted to achieve and never managed to do it. So here is an incredible individual, and it's in the House of the Faun, that's in Pompeii, that we have the incredible discovery of this mosaic, which we'll see is the one on the far left, according to this ground plan. And it was laid into the pavement in a dining room area contemporary with a whole series of other mosaics that you see here highlighted in the plan. And some of those other scenes are attributed to being Alexandrian products, showing scenes of the Nile, which could be, we'll see down the road here, indicative of who actually produced the original painting. So it's found in 1831. It's moved into the Bourbon Palace, which becomes the Museum of Naples in 1844. A copy now stands in place in the House of the Faun that we'll see here, only made of 2 million tesserae, but originally it was composed of over 4 million tesserae. And what kind of mosaic is this? There are various kinds of mosaics. It's micromosaics, which means that opus vermiculatum refers to the fact that the little tiny pieces of stonework are kind of curved, kind of look like little curlicue worms. So it gets this term vermiculatum, like you also have that pasta of that name, referring to that kind of thinness. Looks like little tiny thin worms. Sounds kind of gross, but that's the name that we have from the Latin, laid into the House of the Faun, probably at the end of the 2nd century, beginning of the 1st century BC. And there's so much accuracy in the depictions of the costumes, of the armor, that we think it's either one of two battles. And these are two battles in which the historians tell us that Alexander the Great actually got close to confronting Darius III. So the idea is, unfortunately for Alexander, he never killed Darius the Persian king in battle. He came close. Here are the two battles in which he came close. So it's considered to be then referring to one of those two, so say the historians. Now, Pliny the Elder cited a certain Philoxenus of Eritrea who painted a battle of Alexander the Great for King Cassander. This is a person who's slightly after Alexander the Great. So that's been typically cited in the scholarship as a potential. If this is a painting, and we feel, because the scene shows these two kings in battle against each other, that it's Issus or Gaugamela, maybe it's this battle that was painted for King Cassander. That's one idea. But it's kind of a house of cards, because Pliny the Elder doesn't cite anything other than a battle of Alexander. Well, which battle was it? Doesn't mention the Persian kings in it. So it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a reach, but it's the thing that we have in the sources, and therefore people are going for trying to connect the dots. This is how the work, this is how it works in scholarship. Now, we have a lot of sources that tell us who Alexander the Great was. Callisthenes is actually accompanying Alexander the Great during his expedition in conquering the Persian Empire and beyond. We have two generals under Alexander the Great that are narrating, that wrote their own recollections of what happened. Of course, we know Ptolemy becomes the king of Egypt. When Alexander the Great died, the generals sliced and diced up the remains of the kingdom. Ptolemy made a beeline for Egypt, also hijacked the funerary procession with the body of Alexander the Great. So the body was on display in his kingdom, in Alexandria, the city laid out by Alexander the Great, and gave him a lot of authority. So that's maybe the biggest famous contemporary account, even more so than the court historian, that could have pushed his idea and his recollections of the battles, because he was actually there. We have an engineer, an architect named Aristobulus, and there's a helmsman on a Secretus. So we have a number of different voices. Now, none of that work is preserved. They're cited, they are referred to, they were quoted in the Roman era authors. Arrian's the most famous. He has the most complete account that we have preserved today, then Plutarch, Diodorus, Curtius, and Justin. So we have a number of accounts of the life of Alexander the Great, and the most famous, I'd say, that we have preserved in the Greek is Arrian, followed by Plutarch, Diodorus, and then Curtius and Justin in Latin. So these are the sources telling us those stories, recounting those battles. Let's now take a quick look. This is a quintessential view on one side, and the fleeing Persian king on the right. You see also the gentleman down below holding a horse, and we get that juxtaposition then of the Persian king. His chariot is being wheeled around, but then what's down below him is that foreshortened backside of the horse. So it could also be one of those kind of detrimental kind of images, literally that the Persian king is the horse's ass, because it is a very rather awkward sort of scene. It's not very noble looking. And to the left side of the scene, remember this is over 5 meters long. You have then Alexander the Great, piercing through somebody with a spear, but what's up above him is a tree or tree trunk, right, with some branches, and it doesn't have the leaves on it. So is it then the time of year being depicted, or is it more even symbolically showing then the ultimate outcome for Alexander? A victory, but not a total victory. Didn't kill the king, his foe, in battle. Didn't have that final kind of conclusion to the war. He ends up eventually catching up with the Persian king, who was in the midst of fleeing for a very long time, and then finally killed by his own supporters. So it wasn't the most noble way that Alexander wanted to ultimately defeat the Persian Empire and give himself legitimacy as the rightful Persian king. That's the way history goes. And so you have some maybe potential metaphorical kind of representation here with the use of the tree trunk. And these are the two kind of grand protagonists we have in this mosaic. Now, I mentioned before that there were other mosaics being laid out. Most of them are now in the Naples Museum. 1 or 2 are still in place, but there are a lot of Nilotic scenes. That's led recently. I just saw a scholar as early as maybe this year or last year suggests that if we're looking at sources and we're looking at names and we're looking at authorship, Ptolemy is a good one because of the connection with a lot of the Alexandrian motifs that are put in the House of the Faun at the same time as the mosaic. That's again a hypothetical kind of rationale on the part of that scholar, but it is again, you could say it has a lot of loose ends, or it's something that we can't really take too far. I do think, though, it is interesting, though, as an idea, if we're looking at all these names, well, who's going to have a great account of who or how the battle took place? Well, look no further than the generals, Ptolemy and Nearchus, because they are actually in the battles fighting with Alexander the Great. And in fact, we'll see a detail shortly that might actually be the protagonist who commissioned the work of art according to this new theory. But let's take a look at the House of the Faun today on a rainy day with our copy as it would have looked more or less for a contemporary visiting the owner of the House of the Faun for a lovely meal. This is the triclinium space, so there would have been couches all around the edge of this mosaic. There's Alexander. We'll see it again from the left-hand side. It's a little wet, but there it is on the ground in the Roman context. All would have been lined around the edge with the couches of the diners, who could also look out through the colonnade to enjoy a lovely view of the backyard peristyle court, as it were. So we need to think always of this work of art in two types of context. The original lost context, I think everyone feels very confident that this was originally a painting. And then secondarily, this Roman context. I say Roman context because, Pompeii becomes a Roman colony by 80 BC, and that's around the time in which this was actually conceived of. If not a little bit earlier, then it would have been an Oscan, Greco owner, heavily already influenced by Roman culture. And so it is worth thinking about, as we see it here, was meant to be walked on, meant to be scrutinized by the dinner guests, but a little less than that painting that originally hung on somebody's wall. Still, nevertheless, this would have been it would have been produced at great expense. So here it is on a regular day when it's open to the public, still giving us that sense of that colonnade and giving us a sense of that space, of course, now on the wall for legibility and also preservation. Of course, not there right now because it's being under this great conservation project. And we also see the framework that had to have been added for the mosaic and not for the painting. And we see a big blank spot on the whole bottom end, portion of the mosaic. So we're missing quite a bit. And of course, most of the left-hand side is missing as well. So that's just damage. And of course, what we're ultimately getting that's preserved now inside the museum. We're getting closer. We can see just how close the two kings actually are. And we can see very nicely how the chariot is being wheeled away. Some people argue who's the greater protagonist in this particular scene. Does seem to really highlight the Persian king with his arm outstretched, and Alexander the Great then seems like the branches are arms outstretched on the left-hand side of the mosaic. Getting closer, closer still. And we can actually see, if you look at right by the right hand of Alexander the Great, the face of somebody. And since that person is in a kind of a privileged position, and we see that his face as well isn't covered by a helmet, that this might be that protagonist who commissioned this work of art. You have dying Persians on the right. You have the Macedonian soldiers on the left. There's a guy with a helmet right behind Alexander. Alexander's helmet is missing because, well, you can actually see who he is. And then right below him, right by his right arm, is another protagonist. And he is clearly being defined and delineated as well. Get a little closer still. So this is definitely a portrait of somebody. We think somebody real, and quite potentially, according to this new theory, it might have been somebody who was in the very battle. So Ptolemy does figure prominently in this new theory. I think it's very interesting to consider. And of course, we can see here, as I'm zooming further in, just how small the tesserae actually are to give us that amazing quality of shading. As we can see here, the folds of the skin of the horse, Bucephalus, the shading of Alexander the Great as well. And we see him as a protagonist in portraiture. Here he is in a mosaic, but again, since this is based upon, we think pretty securely, this is based upon a contemporary produced painting, it would then be a very contemporary rendering of his actual portraiture. Maybe the closest we'll ever get to what Alexander the Great actually looked like. And we see all kinds of amazing details here, with the shading, with the details of the armor, the shoes, the boots, the clothing of the Persians, the dying horse with a broken spear in his chest. I mean, just absolutely incredible use of the tesserae, something that you won't see but in a few examples in the ancient world. But it's the scale of this over 5 meters that is so impressive. So I'm taking you in again into the Alexander Mosaic, which is now being preserved, so it's out of view. It's due to be back quite soon, I'm hoping this fall. We shall see. If so, I'll be sure to take you back there for this incredible rendering of history. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of Ancient Rome Live. Don't forget to subscribe and support our efforts. We're a U.S. nonprofit.